The Johnson family had finally made it. After years of struggle, sacrifice, and enduring countless reminders that the world wasn't always fair, they stood before the home they had worked so hard to call their own. Malik, a dedicated father with eyes that carried the weight of his past and the hope for his children's future, held his wife Tasha's hand tightly. Tasha, ever resilient, her smile as warm as the sun setting behind them, looked down at their two children. Maya, the oldest, clutched a drawing she had made of their family in front of the house. Aiden, the youngest, bounded up the driveway, his laughter echoing through the quiet suburban street. To the Johnsons, this was more than just a house. It was a triumph. It was proof that dreams could be achieved, even when the odds were stacked against you. The moving truck parked nearby stood as a testament to the life they were ready to build, box by box, memory by memory. But even as they began to unpack their hopes and dreams, unseen eyes watched them from across the street. Mr. Thompson had been a fixture in the neighborhood for decades. From his front porch, he observed every comings and goings, his gaze sharp and unyielding. When the Johnsons arrived, his lips tightened, his posture stiffened. In his mind, families like the Johnsons didn't belong in his neighborhood. He didn't need to meet them to decide they were a problem. It was just the way things were. For the Johnsons, the future was bright. For Mr. Thompson, the future was a threat. And as the days unfolded, what should have been a celebration of new beginnings would turn into a battle they never expected. Malik Johnson wasn't a man who let the world dictate his worth. Growing up in a small apartment with peeling wallpaper and thin walls, he had learned early that life didn't hand out opportunities, you had to chase them, no matter how far or fast they seemed to run. His wife, Tasha, had a similar fire. The two had met in college, where they'd bonded over shared dreams of building something better than what they'd been born into. Together, they had weathered the storms of life layoffs, financial strain, and the exhausting tightrope walk of being judged for the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. This house was their reward. Years of saving, scrimping, and self-denial had brought them here. A quiet street with tree-lined sidewalks, where Maya and Aiden could play without fear, and where the family could finally feel safe. The keys to the front door felt heavier in Malik's hand than they should, loaded with the weight of what this moment represented. As they unpacked, the Johnsons began to meet the neighbors. Some greeted them warmly, a few with guarded smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. And then there was Mr. Thompson. The first time he came over, it wasn't to welcome them. It was to introduce himself with a subtle air of authority. "You renting this place?" he asked, his voice sharp and clipped. "Malik," taken aback, replied politely. "No, we bought it." Thompson's eyes narrowed, scanning Malik as if trying to find some crack in his statement, some way to make sense of what he'd just heard. "Well, don't let the kids mess up the lawn," he muttered before walking away without another word. Tasha noticed Malik's jaw tighten as he watched Thompson retreat. She placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "It's okay," she whispered. People like that don't matter, but deep down, they both knew better. People like Thompson always found a way to matter whether you wanted them to or not. The days passed, and the Johnsons settled into their new routine. The kids played in the yard, their laughter a balm to Malik and Tasha's weary hearts. But the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was a thin veil, covering the growing tension that seemed to hum in the air whenever Mr. Thompson was near. And then, one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Malik found a piece of paper tucked under the door. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. The bold, cold letters were unmistakable eviction notice. Malik stood frozen in the doorway, the eviction notice crumpling slightly in his grip. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The word eviction struck like a hammer, shattering the fragile sense of security he and his family had begun to build. "Tasha," he called, his voice tight. She appeared almost immediately, concern etched on her face. "What's wrong?" He handed her the notice, his hands trembling. She read it quickly, her brow furrowing deeper with each line. "This has to be some kind of mistake," she said firmly, her voice edged with anger. "We own this house. How can we be evicted?" Malik grabbed his phone and dialed the lawyer who had helped them close on the property. The line rang and rang and rang, the seconds stretching endlessly until the voicemail picked up. He hung up without leaving a message, his frustration mounting. "We'll sort this out," he muttered, more to himself than to Tasha. But the gnawing unease in his stomach told him it wouldn't be that simple. The next day, Malik went straight to Mr. Thompson's house. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding. After a long moment, the door opened just enough for Thompson's face to appear. "What do you want?" Thompson asked curtly, his tone dripping with disdain. "I need to talk to you about this," Malik said, holding up the eviction notice. "There's clearly been a mistake. We bought this house. We're the legal owners." Thompson's eyes flicked to the paper and then back to Malik. His lips twisted into a smirk. "A mistake? I don't think so. You don't belong here, and I'm just making sure things are set right." Malik felt his temper flare, but he forced himself to stay calm. "We belong here as much as anyone else. You have no right." Thompson cut him off with a cold laugh. "We'll see what the courts have to say about that. Until then, I suggest you start packing with that." He slammed the door shut. Malik stood there for a moment, breathing heavily before turning and walking back to his house. Inside, Tasha was waiting anxiously. "What did he say?" she asked. "He's doubling down," Malik replied, his voice tight. "This isn't just a misunderstanding. He's trying to force us out." Tasha shook her head in disbelief. "This is ridiculous. We have all the paperwork. There's no way he can do this." But as the days went by, it became clear that Mr. Thompson was determined to make their lives miserable. He began filing complaints with the Homeowners Association, accusing the Johnsons of violating neighborhood rules, too much noise, unkempt landscaping, even claiming their kids were disruptive to the community. The neighbors, too, started to grow colder. Some avoided eye contact when they passed by. Others whispered behind closed doors, their curtains twitching as they spied on the Johnsons. Malik overheard snatches of conversation words like troublemakers and don't fit in, and each one felt like a knife to the gut. The final straw came one evening when Malik returned home to find a group of men gathered on the sidewalk outside his house. They weren't doing anything overtly threatening, but their presence was enough to send a clear message: "You're not welcome here." Malik called the police, hoping for help. But when the officers arrived, they seemed more interested in questioning him than addressing the situation. "Are you sure you're the owner of this property?" one of them asked, his tone skeptical. "Yes, I'm sure," Malik replied, his voice shaking with frustration. "I have the paperwork to prove it." The officer nodded but didn't seem convinced. "Well, if there's no immediate threat, there's not much we can do with that." They left, leaving Malik feeling more alone than ever. Tasha tried to keep their spirits up, but even she couldn't hide the toll the situation was taking on her. "We can't let him win," she said one night as they sat together in the living room. "This is our home. We worked too hard for this." Malik nodded, but the stress was wearing him down. He could see it in the way his hands shook when he tried to relax, in the tightness in his chest that never seemed to go away. He worried about the kids, too. Maya had started drawing pictures of their family with sad faces, while Aiden had stopped playing outside altogether. Desperate for a solution, Malik reached out to a local advocacy group that specialized in housing discrimination cases. When he explained the situation, the representative on the other end of the line was outraged. "This is illegal," she said firmly. "He has no right to evict you. We'll help you fight this." With their help, the Johnsons began gathering evidence. They compiled every piece of paperwork proving their ownership of the house. They documented Mr. Thompson's behavior and the harassment they'd faced from neighbors. The process was grueling, but it gave Malik a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in weeks, he felt like they might actually have a chance to win. But the fight was far from over. One day, as Malik was leaving the house to meet with his lawyer, he found Mr. Thompson waiting for him at the edge of the driveway. "You think you're going to win this," Thompson sneered. "People like you always think you can beat the system. But this is my neighborhood, and I'm not letting you ruin it." Malik stared at him, his jaw clenched. "We're not going anywhere," he said quietly but firmly. "This is our home, whether you like it or not." Thompson's smirk faltered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. But he quickly regained his composure and walked away, muttering under his breath. That night, Malik and Tasha sat together at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of documents and notes. The weight of the battle ahead was heavy, but so was their resolve. "This isn't just about us," Tasha said softly. "It's about every family that's ever been told they don't belong. We're not just fighting for our home, we're fighting for what's right." Malik nodded, a spark of determination lighting in his eyes. "Then we'll fight," he said. "And we'll win." The courtroom was quiet, save for the faint rustle of papers and the occasional cough. Malik and Tasha sat side by side at the plaintiff's table, their hands clasped tightly together. Across the room sat Mr. Thompson, his lawyer whispering something into his ear. Malik couldn't help but notice the landlord's smug expression, as if the outcome was already a foregone conclusion. Their attorney, a sharp and passionate woman named Lisa, stood and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, we've submitted all necessary documentation proving that my clients, Malik and Tasha Johnson, are the rightful owners of the property in question. The eviction notice issued by Mr. Thompson is baseless and a clear act of harassment." She handed over the deed to the house, copies of the Johnsons' mortgage payments, and other evidence that left no doubt about their ownership. As the judge reviewed the papers, Malik felt his heart pounding in his chest. Every second felt like an eternity. When the judge finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. "Mr. Thompson," he said, turning his attention to the landlord, "can you provide any evidence to support your claim that you have the right to evict the Johnsons?" Thompson's lawyer stood and cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my client believes there was a miscommunication during the sale process. He was under the impression that the property was still under his control." "A miscommunication," Lisa interjected, her voice sharp. "This is not a matter of confusion, Your Honor. This is a deliberate attempt to intimidate my clients and force them out of their legally purchased home." The judge raised a hand to silence her. "Enough," he said firmly. He turned back to Thompson's lawyer. "Do you have any proof to substantiate your client's claim?" The lawyer hesitated, glancing at Thompson, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "No, Your Honor," he admitted finally. The judge nodded, his expression stern. "In that case, I find no legal basis for the eviction notice. It is null and void. Furthermore, I see sufficient evidence to support the Johnsons' claim of harassment. Mr. Thompson, your actions have caused undue stress and financial hardship for this family. This court strongly advises you to cease any further interference." Malik felt a wave of relief wash over him as the judge's words sank in. Tasha squeezed his hand, her eyes brimming with tears. For the first time in weeks, it felt like they could breathe again. But the turning point wasn't just the legal victory. It was what happened next that truly changed everything. As the Johnsons left the courtroom, reporters who had caught wind of the case swarmed them. Cameras flashed, and microphones were thrust toward them. "How does it feel to win?" one reporter asked. Malik took a deep breath before responding. "This wasn't just about winning," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This was about standing up for what's right. Families like mine deserve the same respect and opportunities as anyone else. No one should have to fight this hard just to live in peace." His words resonated far beyond the courtroom. By the next day, the story was all over the local news, sparking conversations about housing discrimination and systemic racism in their community. Even some of the neighbors who had once ignored or avoided the Johnsons began to see them in a new light. Mrs. Bailey, an elderly woman who lived 2 doors down, came by with a pie and an apology. "I'm so sorry for not standing up for you sooner," she said, tears in her eyes. "You shouldn't have had to go through that." The change wasn't immediate, nor was it universal, but it was a start. The Johnsons' resilience had planted seeds of reflection in a community that desperately needed it. And as for Mr. Thompson, the smug landlord who had once believed he held all the power now found himself the subject of public scrutiny. His reputation was tarnished, his actions condemned by nearly everyone who heard the story. For Malik and Tasha, the turning point wasn't just a moment of triumph in court, it was a reminder that justice, though hard fought, could prevail. They returned to their home that evening with renewed determination to not just live in the neighborhood but to thrive in it. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the Johnsons' front yard as Malik and Tasha prepared for the neighborhood meeting. It wasn't something they had planned, but after the media attention their case garnered, the Homeowners Association had called for a community gathering to address the tension. Malik could sense the unease in the air as neighbors arrived, many of whom had kept their distance since the family moved in. In the center of the crowd stood Mr. Thompson, his face a mixture of defiance and discomfort. Though he hadn't directly addressed the Johnsons since the court ruling, Malik could feel the weight of his presence like a storm cloud hovering over their lives. As the meeting began, Mrs. Bailey, the elderly neighbor who had recently apologized, took the podium first. "We've all seen what's been happening here," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "And I think it's time we take a hard look at ourselves. This isn't the community I thought I was part of." Her words were met with murmurs of agreement, but they were quickly drowned out by Mr. Thompson, who stepped forward, his tone laced with resentment. "This whole situation has been blown out of proportion," he said, his gaze darting between the Johnsons and the crowd. "I was simply trying to enforce what I believed were the terms of my property. I never meant any harm." Malik's jaw tightened. But before he could respond, Tasha stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Thompson, you didn't just misinterpret the terms of the sale. You went out of your way to try to force us out of our home. You humiliated us, made us feel unwelcome, and put our family through weeks of unnecessary stress." The crowd fell silent as her words hung in the air. Malik joined her, his voice steady. "This isn't just about us. This is about every family who has ever been judged or treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. You saw us as less than, as undeserving, before you even knew who we were. That's what this is about." For a moment, Thompson looked as though he might argue, but the weight of the stares from the crowd seemed to hold him back. Instead, he crossed his arms and looked away, his expression hardening. Then, to everyone's surprise, another voice spoke up. It was Linda, a middle-aged neighbor who had always kept her distance from the Johnsons. "I'll admit it," she said, her voice hesitant, but growing stronger. "When you first moved in, I didn't make an effort to welcome you. I told myself it was because I was busy, but the truth is, I let my own biases get in the way. Seeing what you've gone through, I realize now how wrong I was." Her admission seemed to spark something in the crowd. One by one, others began to speak up. Some admitted to their prejudices, while others apologized for not stepping in sooner. "I never thought about how hard it must have been for you," said a man who lived across the street. "I'm sorry for not saying anything when I saw what was happening." The growing tide of support emboldened Malik. He turned back to Mr. Thompson, his voice unwavering. "You don't have to like us, but you need to understand this: we're not going anywhere. This is our home now, and we won't let anyone take that away from us." Thompson's face flushed red, and for a moment it seemed as though he might lash out. But then something shifted in his expression. His shoulders sagged and he let out a long, heavy sigh. "You're right," he said quietly, though he couldn't meet Malik's eyes. "I was wrong. I let my own prejudices get the better of me. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'll stay out of your way from now on." Malik and Tasha exchanged a glance, both of them surprised by the admission. It wasn't the full apology they might have hoped for, but it was a start. The meeting ended with a mix of tension and resolution. As the crowd dispersed, several neighbors lingered, introducing themselves to the Johnsons for the first time. "I hope we can start over," Linda said, offering a tentative smile. Tasha nodded. "We'd like that." As Malik closed the door that night, he felt a sense of relief, though he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Change didn't happen overnight, but the confrontation had been a turning point, not just for them, but for the entire community. In the days that followed, small gestures began to appear: a plate of cookies on their porch, a friendly wave from a neighbor. They were small steps, but they were steps forward. And though Mr. Thompson remained distant, his actions spoke louder than words. The harassment stopped, and for the first time, the Johnsons began to feel like they could truly settle into their home. The morning sunlight poured through the windows of the Johnsons' home, illuminating the living room where Malik, Tasha, and their children sat together. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of challenges, but also triumphs. As Malik sipped his coffee, he couldn't help but feel a newfound sense of peace. Outside, the neighborhood had started to come alive. Children's laughter echoed from nearby yards, and the usual hum of suburban life carried on. But something had shifted. There was a warmth in the air, a quiet acknowledgement that change had begun. It started with small acts of kindness. Linda, the neighbor who had admitted her biases during the meeting, stopped by with a housewarming gift. It was a modest plant, but her smile and the sincerity in her voice carried more weight than the gesture itself. "I know this doesn't erase everything," she said, placing the plant on the table, "but I hope it's a step toward something better." Tasha smiled, her heart swelling with hope. "Thank you, Linda. It means a lot." Other neighbors followed suit. The man across the street, who had previously kept his distance, offered to help Malik with some yard work. A group of children knocked on the door to invite little Ava to play, and soon her laughter joined the chorus of joy outside. For the first time since moving in, the Johnsons began to feel like they truly belonged. Even Mr. Thompson, while still distant, made an effort to keep his word. There were no more confrontations, no more passive-aggressive actions. One day, Malik noticed him tending to his garden. Their eyes met briefly, and though no words were exchanged, there was a faint nod of acknowledgement. The Johnsons weren't naive. They knew the changes weren't universal, and the scars of the past wouldn't fade overnight. But they also knew the power of resilience and the impact of standing up for what was right. One Saturday afternoon, the family decided to host a small gathering. It was Tasha's idea, a way to extend an olive branch and continue building bridges. She and Malik prepared a feast, filling the air with the tantalizing aroma of soul food. The turnout surprised them. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now mingled in their backyard, sharing stories and laughter. Children ran around, playing games while adults bonded over shared experiences. "I never thought I'd see this day," Tasha whispered to Malik as they watched the scene unfold. "Me neither," Malik admitted, a smile spreading across his face. "But I'm glad we're here to see it." Toward the end of the evening, Malik took a moment to address the group. "We moved here because we wanted a better life for our family," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "The journey hasn't been easy, and we've faced challenges we never expected. But standing here today, seeing all of you, I feel hope. This is what community should look like: people coming together, supporting each other, and learning from their mistakes." The crowd applauded, and for the first time, Malik felt the weight on his shoulders begin to lift. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the neighborhood, the Johnsons stood together, looking out at their home and their community. The path hadn't been easy, but they had persevered. They had turned a house into a home and a community into something closer to what it should be. Their story wasn't just about overcoming prejudice, it was a testament to the strength it takes to stand up against injustice and the power of resilience to bring about change. As Malik held Tasha's hand, he whispered, "This is only the beginning." The Johnson family's journey was not just a story about standing up against racism, it was a testament to the power of perseverance, dignity, and unwavering belief in one's right to belong. From being unwelcome strangers in a new community to becoming the catalyst for change, their story carried a powerful message: change begins when we refuse to be silenced by prejudice. In the weeks and months that followed the confrontation, the neighborhood continued to evolve. It wasn't perfect. Prejudices don't dissolve overnight, but there was progress. Neighbors who had once avoided the Johnsons now greeted them warmly. Shared moments over barbecues and holiday gatherings started to bridge gaps that had felt insurmountable. Even the once distant Mr. Thompson showed signs of transformation, though subtle. While he wasn't ready for deep conversations or apologies, his actions spoke louder than words: quiet respect replacing hostility. For Malik and Tasha, the journey taught them more than just the strength of resilience. It showed them the importance of community, even when that community falters. It reminded them of the impact of persistence, of standing tall against injustices, and of holding on to their humanity in the face of adversity. Ava, their young daughter, thrived in her new environment, her laughter echoing across the yard as she played with her new friends. It was a sound that reminded Malik and Tasha of why they fought so hard to ensure a future where their children would grow up feeling safe, valued, and unburdened by the biases of the past. As the camera zooms out, the Johnsons stand together on their porch, watching the neighborhood they now call home. It's not perfect, but it's a start. Their story may have ended here, but the message it carries is timeless. Each small act of courage, each decision to stand up for what is right, contributes to a better world. It reminds us that change isn't just the responsibility of those affected by injustice, it's a call to action for everyone. To our viewers, take this story as a reminder that prejudice and injustice still exist in many forms. Whether it's subtle or overt, it's our responsibility to confront it, to learn from it, and to grow beyond it. Let the Johnsons' resilience inspire you to stand up against what's wrong, even when it feels difficult. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's start a conversation about the changes we want to see in the world. And if you believe in the power of storytelling to shine a light on injustice and inspire action, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Stories Unfolded, and turn on notifications. Together, we can continue to share stories that matter, stories that remind us of our shared humanity and our collective strength to make a difference. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep unfolding the stories that shape our world.